Okay. Hi guys. Welcome into our first meeting of the winter quarter for UX UW. If this is your first time here, welcome. But if not, a lot of this will be us putting on different events that'll kind of help you throughout the quarter. It's meant to kind of help you through the recruiting process, up your Figma skills, up your skills, and just learn more about different tools. So today we have a really exciting event. We have Ruochen. Thank you so much for coming today from Expedia, and she will be talking about how to recruit your or elevate your recruiting game by designing your career with modern technology. So definitely an exciting and very relevant talk. So yeah, with that, I'll just pass it to Ruochen.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Hope your evening and your week has been good. The team and I were just talking about the snow today, so I hope you enjoyed some variety in your weather. And super excited to be sharing this talk today about designing your UX career using modern, but also technology that you have access to. So the technology and tools themselves would probably be no surprise to you. I expect you learn about this in your day-to-day in the course. But the purpose of this talk is to encourage you all to think about these tools in a way you might not have before, even though you're familiar with the tools themselves. And I'll walk you through some ways I've personally integrated these tools and tips into my recruiting journey and how to start a UX career. So let's get started, and I hope you come out of today with some new ideas on how to work not just harder, but smarter in launching a career. So first things first, would love for you all to scan this QR code and in one word or emoji, let me know how you're feeling today. So I'm also going to drop it in the chat in case someone's on their desktop and wants to do it. And let's see the answers roll in. Oh my gosh, we got some desperation. We have some people yawning. It's great. Oh yeah, true. Is the UW campus pretty warm or pretty cool? Does that depend on the building? Oh my gosh, extra cold. We got one person who's hopeful. Hopefully coming out of this, there are a few more hopefuls on this.
Posted to be real. I did not post to be real.
I think this is a arm emoji. Ooh. Awesome, very cool, very cool. Thanks for indulging, and I hope to sprinkle in a couple of these activities here and there. So some of you might have seen me before, but for everyone who has no idea who I am, a little bit about me. My name is Ruochen. It's pronounced like a roach and a hen, but one word. And I'm right now a UX designer at Expedia Group. I've been there for a little over 2 years now. And before then, I worked at Ernst & Young or EY. And I was a design consultant for a year, and before that, I was implementing SAP with my MIS degree. So I discovered UX in my journey at EY, realized that this is an amazing career path, and I can't believe I've never heard of anything like this before. So I was super excited to make that internal transition, navigate a little bit of doubt on how is it possible to make that career transition without a formal degree or training in that capability, but go through with it nonetheless, and super excited about that journey. I also, during that time, was a design lead at a startup called Pop Social, and imagine a dating app where instead of meeting romantic partners, you're meeting people around the campus that you're interested in doing activities or making friends with. And that was also some of my experience into the UX space early on. So outside of professional life, I am super passionate about mentorship with college students and high school students. I am a very excited amateur chef. I am also a mediocre skier and a really, really skilled board game player. So I love all sorts of board games, and as long as someone else knows the rules, I'm down. And for today, I have something I want to share, modern technology and how you might use it. But I haven't been a university student sitting in a student org meeting for a few years. So I'd also love your expertise on what you want to know during the share out. So let's make a deal. If you have even an itch to have a question or to make a comment, please ask it in the chat or unmute yourself. And I know one of the lovely moderators of the student org will bring it up to me if in case I miss a raise hand. Oops. The structure of this presentation of how you can use text and tools to help you is in the basic steps you might take when you recruit for a job or the first day of how you would do it. So first, we're going to talk about how you might accumulate knowledge to supplement your coursework that is probably teaching you a lot about UX already. Then there's that networking piece of how you might meet like-minded folks in the community or even at a company or organization you want to work at. How to make your application process more smooth, interview with less nerves and in a way that hopefully makes you more successful and confident. And finally, once you land that job or multiple offers, how you would go into the workplace and start using some of these tools and do your job. So on the learning part, there are so many ways to absorb information, and we're all lifelong learners, whether you're getting that fundamental knowledge on how UX even exists in the first place. I've done that. I knew nothing about UX and I had to learn pretty quickly a lot of information, or even now when I'm doing it in a day-to-day, how to absorb that information better. And it's great to go with the flow to accumulate that information in a way that you know best. So for me, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I learn based on doing things. I learn best under stress, for better or worse. I learn by teaching, and I learn by copying. I want to do something that ties in with my kinesthetic learning ability once again. And the more I do, the better I get at it, rather than read it from a textbook, which is a pretty typical way that I assume UX education goes. There are tons of great books out there, and every other UX article I see recommends a list of basic books that people should read in order to get an understanding of the career. And on the other side, there's the learning by doing. And there are so many things you can do to accumulate projects, whether it's your internships, volunteer works, or a design-a-thon. And somewhere in the middle is a university program that combines both. And besides the way that a coursework or traditional setting goes, there are so many ways to continue to engage with the community and learn information in a way that best appeals to you. So learning isn't something that is dependent on someone giving you information or having a specific deadline to do it. Part of it is based on passion, and some of it is based on, well, it's hard to do this project or do it efficiently if you don't have the knowledge in order to do so. And a way for me to do it is I like interacting with people. So watching YouTube videos is a great way for me to see this work in action or see someone live design something. So I don't have to translate text and take it into a final design. Also, I have the attention span of a goldfish nowadays, unfortunately. So if I'm going to spend tons of time scrolling through social media anyways, might as well make it serve me better. So there are plenty of food or influencers to follow on social media. So why not take some time to follow some designers that you respect as well? And there's a lot of great designer content that helps me not only learn about a few cool tools and tips, but also preparing for interviews. They drop those design keywords that I've read about and hooked at one point in time, but I forgot. And it's great to refresh your memory on if you want to deliver an interview later down the line of how you could talk about your experiences in a way that ties with the UX language and double diamond process that so many recruiters and hiring managers are looking for earlier. And on the podcast side, if you're more of an auditory listener, this is a great way to skip the top 50 hits in the US one day and while walking to class or something. Listen to one of the many podcasts. And I know tons of people are reaching out to professionals organically, asking them, well, can you tell me about a day in your work? How would you deal with this problem? How would you create an app in this space? And the great thing about podcasts is someone else has already found the expert and then crafted the questions. So if you just listen to that podcast, you can get the tidbits of insight without putting into the work of finding the person. And finally, articles. So again, attention span of goldfish, but I love reading articles because they're very short to the point and I'm looking for that topic. So if I'm trying to figure out how to design something on the Android platform, and I'm trying to figure out the best practices, I would search up Android instead of reading an entire book about how to design something and have Android only be a small focus of it. So the best use of the time is to read an article about something, and I'm a huge fan of Medium. Plus, if there are designers you like, a lot of times they even have email subscription letters. So one of the leaders who was at Expedia Group has her own Substack. And after I subscribe to it, she has a lot of top of mind articles that she reads. So it's like a catered collection of articles that she sends out every week. And it's really great for me to immerse myself into what leadership is thinking or what is pressing on in the industry from someone else's perspective. Finally, the tools for learning. So again, learning through doing. I like to do a lot of projects. And if I'm on Figma anyways, I could learn about the color theory. But I also, while doing that, would want to build a palette of my own. And a lot of times people are sleeping on these documentation letters or documentations of the software themselves. And I know software engineers, they read a lot of these docs all the time. But what I like about Figma docs is they're very practical and they can provide helpful videos and screenshots on how to use the tool. So you're able to not only create a prototype on Figma, but you can really speed up the process of how to make an end-to-end flow from hours to just 30 minutes if you have the skills and know the shortcut keys and learn about the software updates that they make so regularly, so you can speed up the process with making more variants quickly. And if you keep up with some of your favorite tools or companies, they also have design events like Adobe Max or the Figma conference every year. So that's a great way to learn about the conferences that they have through what the leaders are thinking, how to use the tools, how to even apply these tools in ways you haven't thought of before, and all that. So onto the networking side. So when I was a student, I wasn't the biggest fan of networking because it seemed very superficial and odd. You only network when you need something and it's with professionals in this rigid manner. But there's a different way to think about networking, which is to know people you trust and advocate for professionally. And you are all students and people who joined a design org. So you already have this inbuilt network of all these faces that you see today. And that's great. But if you want to find people after you graduate or outside of your immediate team, there are communities within even Seattle that you can join. And online, you can reach the international audience with a lot of Facebook groups or even Discord groups. And a great way to use this is people here are already interested in helping each other out and giving advice or be a fly in the wall and learn about UX best practices. So there's tons of knowledge here. And if you ever want feedback, This is a great place to drop your ideas and expect people to have interaction. So for LinkedIn intros, this was something that was asked of me during the last UW event that I went to. And I wanted to show some examples of actual LinkedIn intros I received and give some reactions of how I perceive them to be. And maybe next time you reach out, you'll be able to build that connection in a more meaningful way. So one thing I'd recommend is to define your ask. Are you looking for that one-off review? Are you looking for a reoccurring mentorship? It's a little bit hard when you go into LinkedIn reaching out to everybody, expecting both a lot of commitment in the long term, as well as lots of one-off reviews of things that are generally a heavier ask. So the example on the left is someone reaching out and they said they're interested in accessibility design and wants to work on a project. And they want my help reviewing that project. And my reaction to this is that even though I care about accessibility design, this is not my forte in the design space. And I could tell that this person didn't really understand the work I specialize in when they reached out about accessibility in particular. They also mentioned wanting a few inputs, which is vague because this could be anything from a couple of questions or an entire audit of their project for those inputs. And for someone I didn't really know, that's a very difficult request to respond to. But if they were targeting something that I do have specialization in, like communication design or mobile app design in the social media space, I'd be more inclined to react to them, especially if they were to say something like, answer these 2 questions that'll take you 5 minutes, or even provide a way to drop those questions off async instead of scheduling a time to meet up with them. And the more common thing I get is on the right, where a lot of times people have unclear asks and they say that they are interested in my background as a UX designer. Well, me and thousands of other people on the LinkedIn community, and they are interested in connecting and see if we're willing to collaborate. And that doesn't really make sense. So if people wanted to connect, it's a very easy task on my end. But after that, there's no reason to continue that engagement or build a relationship in a meaningful way, which might be all someone wants. If someone to post something, if you want more eyes to see it, that's a great way just to accumulate networks in your LinkedIn page. But if you want to build a community, I would argue that quality over quantity matters a lot more. And for LinkedIn intros, someone who was a graduate student mentioned that they want to apply for Expedia and asked for a resume and portfolio review. And either because I was busy or I completely missed it, I didn't respond. And this person was probably of the 5% or less who actually followed up. And I was pretty surprised because very few people follow up after they don't get a response the first time. And they wanted to set up a chat. And through the persistence plus the personalization of this message of them being in Expedia or wanting to join Expedia and, having an internship in mind, I decided to set up a time with them. And this person said they set up a time soon. So long story short, I never got an invite from this person after communicating back and forth with time zones and availabilities and comparing with work calendar. And unfortunately, this isn't the first time this has happened either. So general advice on my side is anything that requires coordinating time is a little bit risky, at least for me personally, because you have to do things synchronously. And a lot of times people flake because just like you don't know the person and you're not really as invested to the relationship on the other end as the, requestee, the person who sent the request doesn't really know that person either. So they have almost nothing to lose by not following up if they found someone who was a better fit or could answer their question faster. And finally, there are some LinkedIn intros that were super memorable for me. And one of them was this person I had a class project with when I was in college. And this person was a great teammate. I had a positive work project with them, and they did their part. They were not a freeloader on the project. And when they reached out, they were specific with saying why they wanted to reach out to me. And they had some questions about the travel industry. So I felt very equipped to answer these questions. And yes, I was really glad to hop on a call with this person and check in with them, plus share more about my experiences at Expedia. And yes, there's tons of people in your program today, and you do not have to feel pressured to reach out to them all and check in with them so regularly. That relationship will probably be there a few years from now, just because you were all here in the same space, in the same orgs at some point in time. And if you're a good person and leave a good memory, then at any point, if you want to reach out with a good request that's pretty reasonable, people will want to answer. And the second part was someone that I did meet very briefly, and they reacted to something specific I wrote on Medium. And that was very surprising, because when you publish something to the internet, you don't really know how other people will react. So the fact that this person took the time to read something that I wrote and use it in their introduction felt like I already knew something about this person, and they either agreed with my work, disagreed with my work, or at least had an opinion about it. So super excited to have a discussion with this person and then answer some of the questions about this person's interest in how to find a career for someone with a non-traditional background who was actually did a different career for multiple years. So I felt like I was able to answer this person's question better, and also that we had a natural connection from something when the introduction was made. And again, to emphasize the difference between quality and quantity, many of you might have 500 plus people in your network, but those people might at best react to one of your posts. And a referral link or a meaningful conversation is something that anyone in your network might be able to offer you, or isn't something that you, with all the great experiences you have in the design world and with your program, would want to offer to someone else. And if you have a relationship built on respect and trust, and you admire the other person's working style or even the quality of their work, that means so much more. And I know that sometimes I've dropped referrals for people, and sometimes I've dropped a referral for someone, emailed that recruiter, and passed along what that recruiter said about whether they're qualified or whether a different role is a better fit for that person, just because I knew them well and I trusted their work. So if you want to cast a very wide net, that's on you. But if your philosophy is more precise skills that are, more precise applications and people that fit well and jobs that fit well, then it would be a best use of your time to not cast as wide of a net and make those relationships and apply to the right jobs. And on that note about writing professionally, so ChatGPT is foreign to nobody at this point. And whether or not English is your first language, second language like me, or even your fifth language, there's always a way to rewrite something in a tone of voice that's different from what you expected, or even to sanity check what you're writing. And this is a way to start an intro, LinkedIn outreach, professional bios, or you name it. And even for this event, I am not that comfortable writing, so I drafted up something and asked ChatGPT to write a few variations of what I might want the topic and the description of this talk to be. So play with it and see if you can better ask questions to tailor what ChatGPT writes to be a better fit for you. And another thing that ChatGPT does that I don't think enough people take advantage of, myself included, is that reading comprehension and synthesis part of what you read. So sometimes I read a job description and I realize I had no idea what it just said. It was just a lot of technical words and they all start to blur together. But having something like ChatGPT go through it might give you the top skills that it mentioned and give you some data points that you can action on. So if you know that skill, mobile prototyping, is there so many times, and you ask ChatGPT the right questions to tell you the top skills that were involved or something, then you can incorporate it into a resume better. So if you were really targeting this dream job of yours, you will be able to focus in on a resume and make it the resume for the job rather than use one resume and blast it everywhere. On to application. So application is really an exercise of documentation and persistence because application is pretty soul draining. And mad respects for everyone who can do this multiple days a week for a couple hours every day, because I'm sure you've typed your social security number and address and experiences so many times by now. But a way to integrate technology into how you apply is just to take good notes. And it doesn't matter if you're an Evernote user or you like using Google Docs or even pen and paper, but it's so great to link everything together and start that practice of having clean documentation, a way to organize something that is naturally so chaotic, the whole application process. And it's great because during a phone call, you're saying dozens of things with the recruiter. You've probably mentioned a salary range that is different from a different job. They might have given you some interesting note about the location or culture of this job that if you didn't write it down, it would be lost on you. So having a good documentation of the application process helps you manage where to put your time, who to reach out to, and whether the job that you applied to is a dud or you should follow up on it. Plus, a lot of those job applications you apply to, for some reason, a week or two, they disappear. So if you download some of these jobs or you have a PDF to them, when you're later on in the interview and for some reason that listing was removed, you'll have the notes still there. And also, documentation is great for when you are doing the interview itself. So I recommend all of you to have the exercise and write down the basic interview questions that you know will be asked. And this is a part where you can quickly reference those answers too. And there's a lot you can do with your tech setup in a virtual interview or a phone, where you're looking at multiple screens, you have the information right there. You have even an index that you can go up and down in to find the right questions. So not everything has to come from your memory if recall isn't your best expertise. And like me, you are more of a planned speaker rather than extemporaneous. And another part of application is the portfolio. But I won't over-index on this part because I know you probably have so many different schools of thought on how to build the best portfolio. But I can tell you how not to build the best portfolio. And the Gen AI is not the way to do it today. It's kind of chaotic. And if you've seen these memes online, they have something like a cat and just like make it cuter and cuter and cuter, or make it a portfolio and just make a great one. And it's not that automated yet. And if anything, you do want to stand out in how you create a portfolio. But a different argument is, why even spend that much time on a portfolio? So I've seen a lot of different styles of portfolio out there, and it's a very unique part of the UX designer. I know 10, 20 years ago, people weren't really expected to have portfolios, but as the jobs and the industry became more competitive, this was just a natural requirement that people expected to see. But that being said, treat it as a tech product of your brand, where you make build and buy decisions on where you want to invest your time, money, or get support. Do you want to pay for a pre-existing template or spend the time to find a pre-existing template? Or is this where you want to practice designing and make something from scratch? How many bells and whistles do you need? Is it too long or too short? And something that I didn't do for several years was really look at the impact of my portfolio. So I admit that in my life, I've made 3 different portfolios. At different points in my life, I built a website and thought it was the best thing ever. And then I look at it 2 years from now, it's like, oh gosh, this is really bad. So there's always room for improvement, but there also should be some sort of upper limit on how much work you put in. So for my latest portfolio, which I haven't updated recently because I'm not in recruiting mode, I am aware that if I were to update it, that for now, out of everyone who comes to my website, which is 30 people in a month when I'm not broadcasting it more widely, only 30% visit my first case. Very few people visit my second case, and everyone else who follows, it's negligible. So if I were to change my style of my website, there's no need to update it to all the other cases. And if you want proof for everything that you've been hearing, but some of the ideas contradict each other, like people only spend seconds looking at your portfolio or only put 2 cases, attaching some sort of analytics to a website. I use Webflow, but I know some of the other ones have some sort of analytics component too, would really help you use your time when you're so busy with courses, you want to balance a part-time life, or you even have a social life, which is crazy. For the interviewing section, the general rule of thumb I'd offer here is don't reinvent the wheel. So design interviews outside of behavioral are often split between whiteboarding and the take home. And for both, there are so many tools out there that if you want to do more UX side or product side design, there's no need to create every icon from scratch. So for interviews, the second best way to practice compared to practicing is probably just watching someone else do it. And if it's difficult to schedule, there's tons of resources out there. Again, either free or paid, because tons of design creators have interviews and mentor sessions for you to purchase. Watching a mock interview is super helpful. And designers are taught the double diamond structure or whatnot, but condensing that all in an hour is not like anything else that a designer has to use, even in the job. So this very tight, time constrained, high pressure situation is best that you learn through observation and repetition. And whether it's for the whiteboarding or take home, don't design something basic from scratch. So if you were doing a take home and you know that you need to have an analytics page for some website you build for that case, then it's great just to look at ideas of what kind of analytics page exists there. You don't have to think every minutia, especially if you only have a weekend to do it. And if you want to take it one step farther, highly recommend going to the community tab of Figma or downloading something from Dribbble. They have some components there too, to get the right buttons and right patterns and approximately match it to the same theme in order to convey a basic idea. And when you're whiteboarding, you should already have your pages organized, and you should already have some basic things that you can immediately copy and paste in order to save time and not create everything from scratch, and focus just on the flow and the way you explain it all. And for interviewing practice, you have to do it a few times in order to really master it, because no matter how many times you observe it, it's not really the same. And a good way to practice is to practice with others who you know are also recruiting. And if you want to find a mentor, then a great way to do it is to tap into those who already know and trust you and offer you a interviewing practice session, or to find mentors who you know are open to this. So ADP List is a resource that I'm sure a lot of you already know about, but this and many other communities out there, like a few Facebook groups or even Discord groups or in-person groups targeted towards design, would have people who signed up and went through an entire application process or want to be here in order to help you with very specific things. And if you look on ADP List, on the right, they have some categories on what they are open to answering for you. And if there's availability, you can just schedule that practice right in, rather than go through the dance of introducing yourself to a stranger if you want to go that mentor route. And something that is not used enough would be that self-critique, since you are your own harshest critic. And if you're open to listening to your own voice, then Zoom recordings are great. You are able to reflect after you did an interview, which is probably one of the hardest parts, rather than just saying, phew, I'm done. But really think about what you just said and see if that captures your intent and what you want to deliver. There are also tons of great voice to text programs out there. So if you're more of a reader, there are ways you can translate a recording or such into words, use some sort of program to extract those words, and see what themes are said. If an AI were to interpret what you delivered to this question and how you want to answer that question, does it match your expectations? If you don't know what questions to ask, someone I met this week said how she likes to practice is she looks at the job description, gives it to ChatGPT, asks it some questions, asks it to create questions based off of that job description, and you're able to get that too. So there's tons of creative ways to use these tools in all synergy.
No, I don't appreciate.
Sorry, how long was it on mute? Okay.
Just for a little bit.
Okay, cool. So congratulations, you worked really hard and you got many offers and are on to your full-time job. And at the job, you're still doing a lot of design work in a different way than maybe what you've trained for in your coursework. But there are so many tools at your disposal, or you should at your disposal, and something that you should be able to use and be aware of in order to keep the UX job moving forward. And I'll talk more about that in order to coexist with all the growing technology today that can do a lot of things that people perceive as design work. But something like an image editor, it might be hard to be a graphic designer or to write text for a single field or a single search bar if you are wanting to be a content designer. And what this requires the designer to do is not just to create one graphic or one really strong copy, even though there are marketers and graphic designers who do just that. But one thing that helps you be defensible with all the technology that's coming is to understand how to think deeper and think in a more systematic level. And that's also how a lot of leaders think compared to junior designers, and how not to just create one image, but how to create the tools and thinking behind a whole system of graphics so they all look like a family. And they're able to design that to meet a business need so complicated that you cannot possibly regurgitate it to AI and have it deliver that request. So understanding requirements, translating it, and making it scalable is a way how you can stand out for all the tech that exists in the marketplace. Another example of Gen AI at work is just, it can be a data analyst. It's pretty crazy in this example of Uber Freight. how you can ask a question about performance on a specific metric, not only have the data visualization presented, something that would probably take 30 minutes to put together, but also have the insight on what this data analysis means. And even at Expedia, there are tools that the company is investing in, one of them being ChatGPT, that takes the place of a personal trip planner. And if you were to ask about the weather in Maui, ChatGPT can give that to you. If you can, even when integrated into Expedia's APIs, ask for more complex things based that Expedia has offerings of. So if you want to recommend an itinerary, including the best hotel and the best plane, ChatGPT can piece that together. So that does change the way that me as a designer understands different ways that people can plan trips. And even though a lot of Expedia users are not familiar with planning their trip with ChatGPT, to see this as a new entry point of how someone can build an itinerary organically using text, etc., and how that influences communication. And technology is great. This whole presentation is about technology, and with everything that you already have at your disposal, how you can really speed up and increase the quality of some of the work you did today. But another thing about technology is when used poorly, it's a buzzword, it's a trend. Not everything really matters. And you as the designer or researcher or something in the experience design field, you are the person who is wielding this tool to deliver the organizational requirements. So it's important to learn and be good at your craft, but also understand how to be defensible in your craft when technology might do something that you used to do starting off UX. Like creating a color palette, something I did when I started, is not something that they might require me to do in my workplace, unless I specifically design a color strategy for the entire company and all of the brands. And at Expedia, in my personal example, my top of minds are the old Internet of Things trend, because I look at communications. So push, SMS, notifications in your mobile phone screen, and how it translates to the watch screen, and how you can send a message through desktop, etc. So that matters to me. Also, hybrid collaboration is top of my mind, just because of the way my team is structured. And I know that with my team being international, how we communicate and build culture and alignment on all of our different designs matters. And it asks me to look at design tools in a different way too. So you commonly think of Figma to create prototypes and whatnot, but I've used Figma to create roadmaps just because some other tools are really clunky and difficult to work with. I've also used Figma to host holiday parties and have trivia activities where people can use little speech bubble things and type in their thoughts to answer those trivia, just because it's a fun way to use an existing tool. And some things that I care about, like blockchain, environmental tech, VR, AR, sure, they're cool, but they're not something I think about because it's not directly relevant to my project. And understanding the strategy of how to use technologies to fundamentally make decisions, connect people, and solve complex organizational problems is your job as a designer. So whether or not you're designing, researching, writing content, the latest tech trend is something that you consider, but not to just recommend because everyone else has implemented it and it's the latest, flashiest thing. Often as a designer, you have to communicate why you want to recommend this high cost tool, especially when there are other tools that can fit the job. So you need to make sure your recommendations make sense and fit product needs. And a feedback from my own manager is that it's important to be really good at something in the UX side or the product side, because I'm a UX designer, but I am fairly new in my career. There's no way I'm going to be the best in the world at that specific thing. So you have to train yourself to not only have a strength in a focus, but also to have capabilities in other subsets. So you have the capability to be fluid around the organization. And when these fast changing priorities in large organizations inevitably happen, you'll be able to resource to the right project because your skills are so scalable. So some questions I often get about tech. Do I have to code? And I would respond to that of, well, why don't more designers ask, do I have to research? Do I have to write copy? Because code is just a skill set that exists among all the many other skill sets that design professionals need. And if you don't know how to code and you have no interest in coding, you should not apply for that job that requires you to code. So if you like coding, then look for a job that uses both of those skills that interest you. There are definitely those out there. And do I need to know X tool or Y tool? And I don't think that is really necessary to know every tool that is there on the job posting. But if you need to know a tool, then spend 10 to 30 minutes with it. And afterwards, during an interview, you'll probably learn something about it and be able to answer that you have some experience with that tool. Because at the end of the day, most of these tools and technologies, a lot of them are new, and a lot of them have similarities to other tools you've used before too. So I have this activity, but I also want to leave some time for questions. So let's just jump straight into it.
Hey Ruochen, I got a quick question. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what it's like designing for like a consulting firm and how that compares to a tech company like Expedia.
Yeah, so when I was at EY, a lot of times your experience depends on your client, just like how your experience at a tech company depends on your team. So for my clients, I wasn't as a junior designer, they fill you into whatever is needed by the client. So even though I wanted to be more of a UX designer, there was a specific research need. And a lot of clients aren't XD specialists, so they just kind of fill people to wherever they're needed. I'm sure that'll be different when you're senior or you have focused expertise somewhere. But at Expedia, I felt like I had enough time to grow from someone who has the ability to succeed in this work stream to someone with enough time who really knows how to operate in the communications work stream. Whereas at EY, every client project has more, especially now with these economic times, of a faster deadline. So you're pretty much in and out and you don't get to see it through implementation. So there's a lot more early discovery work. And if you enjoy building design systems, discovery work, competitive audit, that is more likely what you'll be tasked to do.
I see. Thank you. So have you enjoyed the work you've done at Expedia more so than EY, would you say?
It definitely depends on the days. And I've had amazing projects at EY. I really enjoyed building design thinking workshops. And I like the variety of my projects. But if you land on a bad project, it's not that great in either place. So I would say, depending on the project or what team you are on, that would vary.
Sure. Thanks. That's interesting to hear.
I have a question. I'm sitting with Calvin. Okay, hi, sorry. Is this still echo?
I can answer Sushma's question. So what advice do you have for an aspiring designers who just starting their career? Where do underclassmen, undergrads typically begin their journey in this field? So those are two questions. And the second part, I'm not really sure where they usually begin their journey. And I think that varies a lot. So tons of designers start off with startup work or volunteering work. And whether that's part-time or full-time, that's a natural way to start on a lot of these projects. And I know that there are also tons of people who go into consulting earlier on to learn about, or agency, to get a lot of experience really quickly. And you're in Seattle, so you probably know tons of people who go into tech. So I would say that is fairly divided, but it's best to not pick where you want to start your career based on where a lot of your classmates start their career, because that might not be the best fit for you. And also where you start your career doesn't matter that much, because if you built the skills, then you're able to transfer that into your next job if you don't like your first. And what advice you have for designers starting on their career? So it's okay. So if you have your first day at the job, then I would say take a lot of initiative and be vocal about what you're delivering and ask questions. So a lot of times I see junior designers as taking a request, working in heads down time silently. And then with that kind of silent heads down work, the managers are thinking, what is this person doing? So that manager has to reach out to the new designer to see what they're up to and if they have any questions. And most of the time, what you think are the requirements are not the best fit anyways, because someone's new, you can't help it. But having that ball rolling and starting to produce so you can get a visual cue and start asking questions relating to what you've already done is super helpful. So do engage with your managers, your onboarding buddies, and put something on paper, see how it works. If you don't understand what you're doing, try to create a list, put it into words, and have someone read it and see if what you regurgitate matches what the expectations are. Let me know if you have any more you want to add on to that. Okay, Annie's question. Sorry, tech's giving you a hard time today. So at Expedia, do designers and researchers have an in-house community, keep each other primed and adapted to emerging technology? So I guess that's also two questions. So one is, how do a lot of people in design related fields adapt and keep up with tech? In other words, and they empower and support each other. So how they support each other at Expedia outside of tech is, a lot of times the designers would create something and loop in research to help them answer questions. And a lot of times also, designers would be curious about a question and researchers would help them either create a net new study or dig up some existing study to help them stay informed. And are they primed to emerging tech? So yes and no, because a lot of leaders, this is where they keep their eyes on to see what is happening in the market. And sometimes they make these techs part of the roadmap for the year, like the annual initiative. Like ChatGPT is important to Expedia now. But if it wasn't before, it would have just been a radical idea if it was presented by someone on the IC level. And you would have to have justifications to use it. And at the corporate level, it matters less about what you do versus if it's able to deliver what you want it to deliver. So tech doesn't really matter unless it causes some problems. For example, some of these big companies, I know software people complain about the tech stack of some of these 100-year-old companies, and they don't have any incentive to change it, to make it easier to read or something, to remove redundant code. So in that sense, it doesn't make sense to redo everything. But if something is causing problems because it is old and not using the latest technology, or the technology can do something that helps the company, then it matters. Naomi's question has to do with working with a career pivot. So I think a career pivot is often a strength that people don't capitalize enough on, and actually adds an interesting piece to your experience when everyone is doing one thing and you can do that one thing, but you also have architecture skills. And one of my close collaborators at Expedia is also, well, actually two of them, they transition from architecture. So I think it's important to show that you have design chops and prove yourself as a designer first, and then say, oh yeah, I transitioned from architecture and had that be a cherry on top, rather than use that architecture as a crutch for any design gaps that you have. And how to stand out. I feel like standing out as an architecture transition isn't that different from standing out as a designer in general, but position yourself as a designer with architecture as a fun fact or something, rather than have that be a reason if designs are weaker or the thinking is not as mature. Olivia mentioned people skim through portfolios and what they tend to focus on. So it definitely depends on the person. So I've known some people, if they were looking for a job that says they're hiring for VR designers and they see your cases and none of them have a VR tag, that's pretty quickly not going to apply. So I think a lot of times when people glance at it, it's easier to check for things that don't match, and then you cross them off the list, because if you say they do match, then you bring them into multiple loops of further verification. And when people look at portfolios, again, for all the things that don't match, when I was a design lead for the startup and I was looking for new interns, I went through a lot of portfolios and they were just really bad quality design products. So I could tell because margins weren't aligned, even the screenshots were very blurry, and the way the titles were written didn't make sense. And that was a great way for me to show that this person wasn't very meticulous about their craft as a designer, and it did not make sense to even read this case. And if something looked visually pleasing and was exciting, I might take a look further. And really quickly, that recruiter first and then hiring manager would want to make sure that the cases match what they need. And also for more junior designers to understand that that case is solving a business problem and has an impact, which is often not quantified or qualified, because college students think I'm doing a capstone project with a client, it's only 6 weeks. But if you were to show the impact of that 6 weeks, whether or not you went out to interview that client afterwards and say, how was working with us? What impact did it make? You can get a lot of small pieces of feedback that make your project turn from a theoretical case study into a practical project and show impact. So if you can show impact and also some semblance of understanding double diamond design processes, great. But at the end of the day, no one's going to zoom into that photograph of a site map or a user flow that is on paper, it's pretty under bad lighting, no one's going to read through that. So anything that's really small and very minute, people are just like, oh yeah, that's there. Great. Don't emphasize on that, but emphasize on the exciting parts of how you learned and what you did, rather than, well, how you did it, rather than the specifics of this document I did. Please look at the specific middle piece of the project. UX podcast that I recommend. Let me pull out my phone. But while that's happening, any more questions? Yeah, be something that I would say, if you're designing for something that's worthy of a reading, it's like designing an article versus a book. So if you're going to skim an article, what do people have to know? What is the 10% of the article what is the 10% of the book that is so important that it needs to be in an article? So if you're going to create a big website and you had to create a one-pager for that website, what would it be? And then branch out from there. But as you get more senior, the portfolio gets more brief on the double diamond and more on the impact. But at the beginning, it's okay to show that you did all the steps, but understand that no one's actually going to look deeply into the specific steps. I like design better. Cool. Anything else?